Carl Jung discovered something that made his blood run cold. There is a dangerous psychological sign that appears in seemingly charming people before they become destructive. This sign is subtle and involves projection, which acts as a warning system. What is this secret sign that Jung identified, and how can you protect yourself from the silent war you never see coming? In 1913, Jung treated a patient who would forever change his understanding of human danger. This patient was charming, articulate, and seemed genuinely concerned about others. But Jung noticed something terrifying. Every person this patient described as evil or manipulative shared identical traits. These were traits that Jung recognized as the patient's own denied characteristics. The patient was not just mistaken about people, he was systematically projecting his shadow onto everyone around him. What made this case particularly disturbing was how Jung himself had initially been fooled. The patient came highly recommended by colleagues who described him as thoughtful and self-aware. His family spoke of him with reverence, praising his moral clarity and his ability to see through people's facades. Even his estranged brother initially defended him, suggesting that perhaps he was simply more perceptive than others. Jung watched as this man destroyed 3 relationships within 6 months, got 2 colleagues fired through carefully orchestrated campaigns of concern, and drove his own brother to a nervous breakdown, all while maintaining complete innocence and believing himself to be the victim. The patient would sit in Jung's office with tears in his eyes, genuinely baffled by why people kept betraying him. He could not understand why his honesty and insight were met with such hostility. Jung realized he was not dealing with simple misunderstanding. He was witnessing the most dangerous psychological mechanism in human relationships: unconscious shadow projection combined with absolute conviction. The most terrifying part is what modern neuroscience has revealed about this process. When someone projects their shadow with conviction, their brain literally rewrites reality to support their distorted perceptions. Research shows that during intense projection episodes, the same neural networks activate as during delusional states. The person is not consciously lying. Their brain has actually altered their perception of reality. The prefrontal cortex, which normally fact-checks our perceptions against reality, becomes hijacked by the emotional centers of the brain. The projector's memories are rewritten in real time to support their narrative. This explains why shadow projectors are so convincing to others. They genuinely believe their distorted perceptions because their neural filtering system has been hijacked by unconscious content. They pass every lie detector test because to them it is not a lie. Their conviction is real, even though their perception is false. The projector's conviction creates what psychologists call reality distortion fields. They do not just see you incorrectly, they convince others to see you through their distorted lens. Here is how the distortion field operates in real time. When the projector speaks about you with such certainty, such emotional intensity, and such apparent pain, other people's brains automatically assume there must be truth to it. We are wired to trust emotional conviction as a signal of authenticity. The projector's distress seems so real that observers conclude the accusations must have merit. Even intelligent, psychologically aware people fall into this trap because the projector is not performing distress. They are genuinely experiencing it, even though its source is their own projected shadow rather than your actual behavior. Jung documented case after case where shadow projectors destroyed reputations, relationships, and entire social networks simply by spreading their unconscious projections with absolute certainty. Think about the last time someone accused you of motivations you never had, emotions you never felt, or intentions you never possessed. If they did it with complete certainty, immune to any evidence you provided, you were experiencing shadow projection in real time. The stronger the projection, the more convinced the projector becomes. It is a psychological feedback loop that can trap entire families, workplaces, and communities. The warning sign appears when you notice a complete disconnection between how someone describes you and your actual internal experience. They attribute thoughts, feelings, and motivations to you that exist nowhere in your consciousness, and they do it with such certainty that you start questioning your own reality. This is psychological gaslighting at its most sophisticated level. Not conscious manipulation, but unconscious reality distortion that can drive targets to genuine psychological breakdown. But here is where it gets truly dangerous. The projector's conviction creates a force field that pulls others into their alternate reality. They do not just misperceive you. They recruit an army of believers who see you through the same warped lens. Jung called this collective possession, when entire groups begin seeing the world through one person's projections. The process by which one person's shadow projection becomes a group reality follows a predictable pattern. It begins with the projector sharing their concerns with others, always framed as worry or care. They approach people individually, testing who will be receptive to their narrative. Those who question the projector's perceptions are quietly excluded from future conversations. Those who validate the projections are brought deeper into the inner circle. What makes people susceptible to joining a projection field is a combination of factors. Some people have their own unresolved shadows that resonate with the projector's accusations. Others fear becoming the next target if they don't align with the dominant narrative. Many simply trust the projector's emotional intensity as evidence of truth. The projection spreads like a psychological virus, infecting one person at a time until a critical mass is reached. At that point, the group's collective belief in the projection becomes self-reinforcing. Anyone who questions it is seen as naive, in denial, or complicit with the accused. In workplace settings, this manifests as mobbing, where an entire team turns against one person based on projected accusations. In families, it creates scapegoating, where one member becomes the repository for all family dysfunction. In communities, it produces witch hunts, where an individual is systematically destroyed for crimes that exist primarily in the projector's unconscious. When someone presents their projections with absolute conviction, others experience psychological pressure to align their perceptions with the projector's certainty rather than trust their own contradictory observations. The perceptive person becomes the designated problem, not because they cause problems, but because they reveal problems that already exist in the collective unconscious. Jung observed that the bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. This pattern explains why these individuals do not just feel misunderstood, they feel systematically targeted by a force they cannot rationally explain. The projection is not about them at all. It is about the group's need to externalize and attack the very qualities they cannot accept in themselves. Here is what made Jung realize how powerful and dangerous this process truly is. The projector becomes the center of a psychological storm, unconsciously organizing others into attacking the very qualities they cannot accept in themselves. The projected upon person becomes isolated, gaslit, and eventually broken by a collective delusion they never participated in creating. Jung identified 5 unmistakable warning signs that reveal dangerous shadow projection. First, absolute certainty about others' motivations. They do not say, "I think you might be." They say you are with complete conviction about your internal states, motivations, and character. Second, immunity to contradictory evidence. No amount of explanation, clarification, or contrary evidence can shake their perceptions. They interpret your attempts to correct their misperceptions as further proof of their accuracy. Third, emotional intensity disproportionate to evidence. They have strong emotional reactions to perceived slights or behaviors that others find minor or non-existent. Their emotional intensity reveals the projected content, not your actual behavior. Fourth, consistent victim narratives. They consistently end up in conflicts where they are the innocent victim of others' malice, manipulation, or cruelty. The cast of characters changes, but they are always the wronged party. Fifth, recruitment behavior. They subtly or overtly try to get others to see you the way they do, often through seemingly concerned conversations about your character or behavior. When you see these 5 signs together, you are not dealing with simple misunderstanding or personality conflict. You are facing unconscious shadow projection that will escalate until it destroys something: your reputation, your relationships, or your sanity. These 5 signs appear together because they emerge from the same psychological mechanism. The projector's unconscious mind is desperately trying to avoid confronting disowned aspects of their own psyche. The absolute certainty comes from the psychological necessity of the projection. If they allow any doubt, the projection collapses and they must face their own shadow. The immunity to evidence serves the same function. Every contradiction must be reinterpreted or dismissed to maintain the projection's integrity. The emotional intensity reveals how much psychic energy is invested in avoiding self-confrontation. The victim narrative protects their self-image as good while projecting all badness outward, and the recruitment behavior unconsciously seeks collective validation to reinforce the projection's apparent reality. What it feels like to be on the receiving end of all 5 signs operating simultaneously is a form of psychological warfare that leaves you questioning your own sanity. You know with absolute certainty that their perceptions are false, yet they speak with such conviction that you begin to doubt yourself. You provide evidence of your actual motivations and behavior, yet somehow this evidence is twisted into further proof of their accusations. You watch as other people, who once knew you well, begin to see you through the projector's distorted lens. The isolation is profound because you are being attacked for a version of yourself that does not exist, which means there is nothing you can do to defend yourself effectively. Shadow projection follows a predictable escalation pattern. First comes initial projection, subtle accusations or attributions that do not match your reality. You dismiss them as misunderstandings. Then conviction crystallization. The projections become more frequent and certain. The projector shows no doubt about their perceptions despite your corrections. Next is reality distortion. The projector begins interpreting everything you do through their projection filter. Neutral actions become evidence of malicious intent. Then social recruitment begins. They start sharing their concerns about you with others, always from a place of apparent care or worry. This leads to collective possession. Others begin seeing you through the projector's lens. You find yourself defending against accusations that seem to come from nowhere. Finally, systematic exclusion occurs. The group organizes around the shared projection, systematically excluding or attacking you for qualities that exist primarily in the projector's unconscious. Understanding this pattern can save you years of psychological damage. The key is recognizing the second stage and extracting yourself before the projection gains collective momentum. But shadow projection is not the only dangerous sign Jung identified. He discovered an even more dangerous psychological state called ego inflation. While shadow projectors are unconsciously dangerous, inflated individuals are consciously convinced of their own righteousness while being completely blind to their shadow. The inflated person does not just project their shadow. They identify with archetypal energies that far exceed their personal capacity for integration. They become possessed by the savior, the wise one, the truth-bearer, or the righteous judge. Unlike obvious narcissists who are easily spotted, inflated individuals often appear spiritually evolved, morally superior, or intellectually enlightened. This apparent elevation makes them infinitely more dangerous because people willingly submit to their authority. What distinguishes dangerous inflation from healthy confidence is the complete absence of doubt or self-questioning. A healthy, confident person can acknowledge uncertainty and mistakes. They recognize the limits of their knowledge and perception. The inflated person experiences no such limitations. They have achieved a kind of psychological certainty that eliminates the normal human capacity for self-reflection. The danger of spiritual and moral inflation is particularly acute because it disguises itself as virtue. The person is not inflated about their wealth, beauty, or intelligence. They are inflated about their goodness, their wisdom, their connection to truth or divinity. This makes their inflation nearly invisible to others and completely invisible to themselves. They justify behaviors that contradict their stated values by reframing those behaviors as necessary for the greater good. The spiritual teacher who exploits students is helping them transcend attachment. The moral crusader who destroys lives is serving justice. The inflated person's identification with archetypal goodness allows them to commit archetypal evil while maintaining complete conviction in their righteousness. The warning signs of dangerous inflation include never doubting their own motivations. While authentic spiritual teachers express humility before mystery, inflated individuals exhibit absolute certainty about their perceptions and judgments. They interpret disagreement as evil. They do not process questioning as useful information, but as resistance to truth, goodness, or divine will itself. They display extraordinary charisma combined with rigid thinking. Their conviction creates magnetic attraction, while their inflated state eliminates psychological flexibility. Jung warned that inflated individuals eventually collapse under the psychic tension of identifying their small ego with transpersonal contents. But before they collapse, they often cause devastating damage to others through their absolute conviction in their own righteousness. The third dangerous sign Jung identified is complete identification with the social persona. The mask we wear in public becoming the only identity the person recognizes. This creates what Jung called the perfect person problem. Someone so adapted to social expectations that they have lost all connection to their authentic self and shadow. The danger is not obvious, because persona-identified individuals are often models of social appropriateness. They always know what to say, how to act, what expressions to wear. But this perfection conceals a terrifying emptiness. When someone has invested all their psychic energy in maintaining a flawless external image, their rejected shadow aspects do not disappear. They accumulate in the unconscious like psychological pressure in a sealed container. The warning signs include uncanny social perfection. They never seem to have bad days, inappropriate reactions, or human inconsistencies. There is an artificial quality to interactions. Despite technical correctness, something feels hollow or performed in their presence. They show extreme reactions to perceived image threats. Any challenge to their perfect persona triggers disproportionate defensive responses. Jung documented how persona-identified individuals often experience sudden shadow eruptions, explosive episodes where all their repressed content emerges in destructive ways. The more perfect the persona, the more chaotic and dangerous the eventual shadow explosion. The shadow eruption is inevitable because psychological energy cannot be destroyed, only redirected. Every impulse, emotion, and tendency that is denied conscious expression continues to exist in the unconscious, gaining energy over time. The eruption is typically triggered by a situation where the persona can no longer be maintained, a crisis that demands authentic response, or a moment when the mask slips and the person glimpses their own emptiness. What emerges is often the opposite of everything the persona represented: the perfect parent who suddenly abandons their family, the model employee who commits fraud, the moral exemplar who is discovered in profound hypocrisy. What makes these eruptions particularly tragic is that the person often cannot learn from them. After the eruption, they either double down on the persona, insisting it was an aberration that will never happen again, or they collapse entirely, unable to construct a new identity that integrates both light and shadow. The persona-identified person lacks the psychological tools for integration because they have spent their entire lives avoiding the inner work that makes integration possible. Perhaps the most alarming sign Jung identified is archetypal possession. When someone loses their individual identity and becomes a channel for transpersonal energies beyond their capacity to integrate. You can recognize this state when someone's personality seems to disappear, replaced by something ancient and impersonal. Their eyes change, their voice changes. They speak with authority that does not belong to their personal experience. They might become possessed by the eternal victim, always suffering and demanding rescue. Or the righteous warrior, fighting cosmic battles against evil that only they can see. Or the divine parent, treating adults like children who need their guidance and control. The possessed person experiences extraordinary certainty and purpose. The normal ambiguity of human consciousness disappears, replaced by absolute conviction that can be extremely persuasive to others. How do you distinguish archetypal possession from passionate belief? The key difference is that passionate belief remains connected to the individual's personality, history, and capacity for doubt. The possessed person's conviction seems to come from somewhere beyond them. They speak, as if channeling a force rather than expressing a personal opinion. When you talk to someone who is possessed, you have the uncanny feeling that you are not actually speaking with them anymore. You are speaking with the archetype that has taken them over. Their responses are predictable because they come not from individual consideration, but from the archetypal script. This is why it is nearly impossible to reach them with reason, emotion, or appeals to your shared history. The person you knew is temporarily absent, replaced by an impersonal force that cannot be negotiated with or appealed to. Here is what makes archetypal possession so dangerous. Archetypes contain extreme polarities. The same archetypal energy that produces saints also produces fanatics. The person possessed by the savior archetype will inevitably manifest its shadow aspects, often becoming the very thing they claim to oppose. Jung documented cases where possessed individuals committed acts completely contrary to their conscious values, later experiencing amnesia or elaborate rationalizations to explain their contradictory behavior. The final dangerous sign is what Jung called the compulsion to repeat. Unconscious patterns where someone obsessively recreates the same painful situations while believing themselves to be victims of cruel fate. This might seem less dangerous than the other signs, but people trapped in repetition compulsions unconsciously recruit others to play roles in their unresolved psychological dramas. The warning appears when you notice someone consistently ending up in identical painful situations with different people, always following surprisingly similar scripts. They seem genuinely surprised each time the pattern repeats, as if they are victims of destiny rather than unconscious architects of their own recurring experience. The danger is getting recruited into their psychological drama. Without realizing it, you can find yourself playing a role in a story that began long before you met this person, usually the role of betrayer, abandoner, or persecutor. Jung called this negative synchronicity, the unconscious ability to orchestrate encounters that perpetuate unresolved patterns. The person trapped in repetition compulsions unconsciously emits signals that attract precisely those who can help them recreate their original traumatic scenarios. Now that you can recognize these dangerous signs, how do you protect yourself? Jung's protection protocol is deceptively simple. Conscious awareness combined with immediate boundary enforcement. First, Trust your gut. If someone's perception of you consistently contradicts your internal experience, trust your internal reality over their projections. This step is psychologically necessary because projection works by making you doubt your own perceptions. The moment you prioritize their distorted view over your internal knowing, you have entered their reality distortion field and lost your anchor to truth. Second, do not try to convince them. Shadow projectors, inflated individuals, and possessed people are immune to contradictory evidence. Attempting to convince them often strengthens their projections. This is perhaps the hardest step to accept, because every instinct tells you that if you could just explain yourself clearly enough, they would understand. But the projection is not based on misunderstanding. It is based on psychological necessity. They need to see you this way to avoid seeing themselves clearly. Third, limit information. Do not share personal details that can be twisted into evidence supporting their projections. Every piece of information you share becomes ammunition for their distorted narrative. Fourth, document interactions. Keep records of conversations and events. Projectors often rewrite history to support their distorted narratives. Having a factual record protects you from gaslighting and provides evidence if others begin to question the projector's version of events. Fifth, seek outside perspective. Talk to trusted others who know both you and the projector. Reality check your perceptions with people outside the projection field. This is critical because extended exposure to projection can make you doubt your own sanity. Sixth, withdraw when necessary. Sometimes the only winning move is not to play. If someone shows multiple dangerous signs, strategic withdrawal may be your only protection. The emotional difficulty of withdrawal cannot be overstated, especially when the projector is a family member, long-term partner, or close colleague. You may feel like you are abandoning them, betraying the relationship, or admitting defeat. But withdrawal is not defeat. It is a recognition that you cannot help someone who is unconsciously committed to their distorted perception of reality. Your presence only provides them with a target for projections that will continue regardless of what you do. The most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself is to remove yourself from a dynamic that benefits no one. Remember that patient who changed Jung's understanding of human danger? The one who destroyed relationships while maintaining complete innocence? Jung eventually realized that this patient's shadow projections were not random. They were systematic attempts to avoid confronting his own capacity for the very behaviors he saw in others. The patient could not tolerate knowing that he was capable of manipulation, cruelty, and selfishness. So his unconscious mind projected these qualities onto everyone around him, allowing him to feel pure while unconsciously acting out the very behaviors he condemned. This is the tragic irony of shadow projection. People become the very thing they most fear or hate, all while maintaining complete unconsciousness of their own transformation. But here is what Jung discovered that can save you. Conscious awareness of these patterns breaks their power. When you can recognize shadow projection, ego inflation, persona identification, archetypal possession, and repetition compulsions, you are no longer vulnerable to their unconscious influence. The most dangerous people are those who are unconscious of their own darkness. But the moment you become conscious of these patterns, in others and in yourself, you step out of their psychological jurisdiction. Jung spent his life mapping these dangerous territories of the human psyche, not to create fear, but to create freedom. Freedom from unconscious manipulation, freedom from projection fields, freedom from being recruited into other people's psychological dramas. The most dangerous Carl Jung psychology sign is not just shadow projection. It is the absolute unconsciousness of one's own shadow, combined with complete conviction in one's own perceptions. When you encounter someone who shows this sign, remember Jung's words. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. People who cannot accept themselves completely will inevitably make you the repository for everything they cannot bear to see in themselves. Your protection lies not in fighting their projections, but in maintaining conscious awareness of what belongs to you and what belongs to them. That consciousness is your shield against the most dangerous psychological forces in human relationships. If you recognize yourself or someone you know in these patterns, share your experience in the comments. Sometimes recognizing these patterns in our past can protect us in our future. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's discoveries about psychological development and the hidden wars that rage in every relationship. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.